welcome. Oh, I gotta pay close attention to my noise monitor so I don't make awful noises. Happy Friday, everybody. I hope you're having a good end of the week or beginning of the week. I don't know. People watch this from all over, so I'm just gonna set up a couple more things, make sure everything's going good. All right, excellent. We are good to go. And I can see you guys' chats. All right, today we are starting a new project. So I did a Twitter poll just to see, because I had a couple, I think last week I mentioned that there were a couple projects I was interested in doing, and I was looking at maybe doing some data cleaning or maybe reproducing some research. And I did a Twitter poll, and the vast majority of people, over 50%, in a poll that had 3 options, would like me to work on my research replication, which I am very excited to do. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be trying to, I'm imagining it's going to take more than a day, so this will be another one of those, like the emoji project, sort of continuing projects. But we're going to get started. So the paper that we are going to be replicating the results from, or rather reproducing the results from, is itself a paper that replicates and tries to reproduce the results of an earlier paper on predicting the stock market using Twitter text analysis. So the paper is here, and if you're watching on Twitch, I put the link in the Twitch, and if you are watching this later on YouTube, I'll put the link in the YouTube comments if I remember. If I don't remember, yell at me and I'll do it. And this is a sort of an interesting paper. It's a little bit meta that I'm trying to reproduce this reproduction. It was published in Econ Journal Watch, which is like a, I don't know, it's just sort of like a letter to the editors for econ, I guess. I'm not an economist, I will say. I picked papers to replicate for this project. This is actually the second paper I've done, and there will be more coming. And keep your eyes peeled. We got stuff in the works. I picked papers based on the very rigorous criteria of, did I think it was interesting? Was it a good fit for replicating on Kaggle? And did I think it would be sort of like a good service to the community to reproduce? And also, was it something that I knew like a little bit about? Like, was I able to evaluate the methods based on my own academic background? So there's going to be a lot of economics, markety stuff in this paper, and I don't know nothing about none of it. But I can absolutely help to shed, additional light on the NLP aspects of this paper. So, 2 things. First, let's talk about the difference between replication and reproducing research. So I'm reproducing research. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and hopefully pretty much just one by one reproduce all their results. So take their data and get the same results than figures that they had. So the first long part of this paper is just them discussing the different papers. This is from the paper they were reproducing. Actually, both of these are from the paper that they were reproducing. And I'm not going to reproduce those figures. I'm going to reproduce their figures. So this is their reproduction of the earlier paper's sentiment. Oh, awesome. Quabena says they're a new R user here from Africa. Heck yes for R. And an economics student. So this sounds like the perfect topic for you. And if I say something really dumb about money, please just let me know. This is not my field. So we do want to be able to reproduce things like this figure, this table, and just sort of get like the same output that they did. Replicating the research would be trying to get the same type of results, like the same overall finding, but based on a new data set. So I'm not doing that. I'm not going out and collecting new data and then trying to do the same sort of analysis on new data. I'm trying to do the same analysis on the same data, which is reproducing the research. And not everybody uses all of those terms exactly that way, but that's how I'm going to be using them. So just for, excuse me, for clearing out confusion. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold and I'm a little flummy. So if I sound gross, that's why. Okay, so the really nice thing about this paper and this topic is that they provide all of their data. So if you scroll away to the bottom of the paper, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the peculiarities of the paper, you can see that there is a link here right at the bottom. So this is a zip download. And there's also a link to a GitHub repository, and it is this GitHub repository. And I really quickly checked to make sure there was the same information in the download and the repository. And there is one file that is in the download that is not in the repository, and it is this bibliography file, which is just the bibliography for the paper, and is not in the GitHub for whatever reason. But you guys can download that if you like. And I can tell that this is not in my field because these journals and conferences mean like nothing to me. Like the Journal of International Money and Finance, is that a good journal? I don't know. I have no idea, man. The Journal of Finance, I don't know. It's a short journal title, maybe? Generally, journals with shorter titles tend to cover more of a field and therefore be harder to get into and therefore more prestigious. So like Science, very prestigious journal. I'm trying to think of an example of one that's a little bit more specialized. Like not that it's bad to get published in a specialized journal, but it's just a little bit easier because the audience is smaller. Anyway. So this file is not in the GitHub, and I think that's fine. There's also some PDF files that I'm basically gonna ignore. So there's this file that is information on, it's a classic, Journal of Finance is a classic economics/finance journal. Excellent, thank you. So yes, that is a good journal. Publication venue, for anybody who does not have much of an academic background, is super important. Okay, yeah, so actually these are kind of important to us. So there's this whole section in this Appendix 1 about replication and reproducibility. So one thing that they mention is that as Twitter's policies currently stand, we are unable to share the Twitter data used with anyone outside a select group of Princeton University and University of Tokyo academics. So there is, this has actually changed recently, but I imagine they're still bound by the old developers agreement. Twitter has limits on how much data you can share, like the amount of data and which data and sort of what form you can share it if you have it from them. So they aren't able to share the data itself. Now there is a way around this that documenting the now. There's an archival project called Documenting the Now, which was developed specifically to document social media and Twitter data. So this is, if you're not familiar with this project, it's a really interesting and very valuable sort of data archiving project that collects sets of tweets that are about important events, and what they can provide is not the tweets themselves and like all the text, but they can provide the IDs for each tweet, and then you can use their really nice hydrator tool that takes Twitter IDs as input and then goes and fetches the full metadata. So that's one way to get around Twitter's they're not regulations because it's not a regulatory body, but like their limits. There's a couple other ways. So one is to actually scrape tweets, because the limits apply to tweets that you get through the API. So if you're using a scraper, there's a little bit different. The reason why you might not want to do that is if you distribute just the IDs, then if somebody wants to delete a tweet or they delete their account, then when you go to fetch it with a hydrator or a different tool, you won't be able to get that tweet. So it gives people power and control over their own data, and that's from my point of view, that's a really good thing to give people who are producing data that you are using. So I'm working with the researchers. By the way, they know that I'm doing this. This is not like a surprise to them. I'm working with the researchers, and hopefully we can get an ID of the tweets that they used, a list of the IDs of the tweets that they used. And they had a little bit over 10 million, so it's a fairly large data set. Oh, that's right, I came from this page. So they have a little section talking about replication and reproducibility. So again, replication is new data, reproducibility is the same data. And they talk about, so they ran into the problem with tweets being deleted. Is that a problem? Question mark. They ran into tweets that were deleted. So they're making all their code available on GitHub, which is excellent. They omitted several data analyses from the final version of the document. So the paper itself is a version of a thesis, a master's thesis, I believe, or possibly a senior thesis. So it's a sort of a condensation, I guess, of a longer research topic. So we won't be able to start from nothing with the raw Twitter data, is basically what I'm saying here. We can't get the raw tweets and then do the analysis, because what I want to do is have this all on Kaggle. So instead of going through the process of being like getting the code and setting up the environment, people can just fork the notebook and then run it and then have the same results that these researchers had. And part of the reason I'm doing this project is to sort of put together a list of best practices for people who want to make their research reproducible in that way. So like I'm calling it in my head one-click reproducibility. I'm making air quotes, but you can't see it. One-click reproducibility, so that people can very easily share their data, and say a reviewer could really quickly get the same results that they did. Hi, sad Canadian, or sorry, Canadian sad. And this is, okay, so this is the psychological inventory that the original paper based their analysis of tweets on. Raw data. This is the information that they have. So the tweets that they were analyzing were from 2006 to 2008, I believe. This is the parts of a tweet, sampling, n-grams. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting Wittgenstein. I had to read that in grad school. It was tough going. Mood dictionaries. This is what I'd call a sentiment dictionary or a sentiment inventory. They discuss their pre-processing, the use of Twitter as a survey tool, so like methodological considerations. I should probably print this out and read this. Information about the researchers. Okay, so it may have been more useful for me to read this before getting started than the entire paper, which is what I did. But I will read this later, I think. Oh, nice, and demographics. I am always happy to see demographics in a Twitter study. That is my jam. Okay, so more additional data is in the appendices, which is fantastic. We also have some readmes. So there's this very short readme that says what's in the file and how it got there. And then there's this slightly longer readme about the calm sentiment data.csv. And this is the file that has the what am I looking for? The metrics that they've extracted from the raw Twitter data, and this is what they can share. So we're going to be able to use this. And what isn't in this repo, you may notice, is a license file. There is no license for this. But again, I've been communicating with these researchers, and the code, they're comfortable with being distributed under an Apache 2.0 license. And I guess that includes the data. I need to double check with them about that. So I'm definitely not going to make this data publicly available until I have absolutely pinned down what the license is going to be. And this is something that I've noticed in doing this project, is that academic researchers are not great about distributing licenses with their data and code. Please do that. Please do that. If you don't do that, your data is just protected under copyright and people can't use it legally. Like, do people use it? I mean, yeah, they do, but like, people couldn't incorporate this into some sort of like I don't know, something that would be used for some sort of commercial entity. But you're also not saying like you explicitly can't do that. I don't know. It's just better to add licenses to your both your data and your code. All right, I'll get off my soapbox, but that's definitely a best practice that I'm recommending. And we also have, so this is the CSV that has the metrics that they had, and they do have some missing values here. So these values have to do with the stock market. So the Dow Jones scam calls industrial. It should have an average at the end, I guess. That's what they've been doing, or maybe it's the Dow Jones Index. I don't know. The reason we have missing values here is because these are weekends, and the stock market doesn't do anything on weekends, so it just doesn't change. And then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, stuff happens. Weekends, nothing happens. Weekdays, stuff happens. Weekends, nothing happens. So on and so forth. We also have information on the tone, which is one of the metrics they had. Dow Jones Index. Thank you. I'm so glad I have an economist here to stop me from saying dumb stuff. Calmness, which is another metric. So the original paper, I guess we can go back and talk about this, was published in 2011 by Johan Bolin, Juana, I'm butchering that, Huayna Mao, and Xiaojun Sung. Wow. BMZ is what paper is referred to as in this paper that I'm replicating. And what they found was that this psychological measure of calmness based on the presence of words associated with calmness, so this bag of words technique, was highly correlated with the market 2 days after the Twitter sample was taken. And so they took this finding and they founded a company that sort of did stock things. Again, I don't know. This is not my bailiwick. I'm not well informed on this topic, but I can't tell you bag of words is sort of a very lossy way of measuring sentiment. And their company lost a bunch of money and was not very successful, and a lot of work done afterwards trying to replicate these results found that it was not actually useful. And part of the reason that they may have had that finding, I mean, there could have just have been nothing there. There maybe was no signal. And the other thing that might have happened is that they might have had, what am I trying to say? There might have been an effect of having this paper published so that everyone knew that that was the case. So people started using Twitter information to change their behavior on the market. So it could have been that having published the paper had an effect. So I might call that a, what's the term from psychology? Hancock effect? Where being observed changes your behavior. Anyway, it was named after a mill where the people in the mill knew that they were being watched. So regardless of the experimental thing that the experimenters did, it was the fact that they were being watched that changed their behavior. So this article that I'm replicating replicates the original work with data from the same time period, and they were unable to replicate the results or reproduce the results and get the same sort of effect that the original authors found. So again, it's very meta. I'm reproducing a reproduction study. Yeah, so that's sort of the premise of the paper. And the files in here, this anxious file is the bag of words used to identify anxious tweets, so tweets with a high level of anxiety. So these would be, higher anxiety would be associated with a lower stock market 2 days afterwards. So there's sort of a delay they proposed. And I don't know if you're familiar with sentiment lexicons, but 77 entries is not a lot of entries. And these are things like jumpy, uptight, twitchy, intense, overwrought, negative, frightened, watchful, disgruntled, neurotic. So fairly low frequency words, and also just not that many of them. So even if you... So my first sort of like critique of the original paper would be that this is not a great way of measuring anxiety. My secondary critique of the original paper would be, and I think it's the bigger problem, is that they had multiple comparisons, like a lot of multiple comparisons, because they looked at sort of like the ends of these scales, and there were 6 different scales, and they had a bunch of data, and they ran the same test over and over and again, changing one parameter each time. And it's a really good example of what happens if you try to do the same test a bunch of times, and eventually you're going to find something that's statistically significant, because statistical significance says that it is unlikely that you would get a result this extreme just by chance if there is no effect of your manipulation. But if you're running like 100 manipulations, you're likely to get an unlikely effect in there somewhere, if that makes sense. So that's the problem with multiple comparisons. So they also used composed words. Kubena says, quite common with financial markets and anomalies. The anomalies disappear once the market starts to act on it. Most often you spend months finding an anomaly, only to find that it doesn't exist anymore because it's been traded on. This is one reason why ML AI is so hard with finance. Interesting, yeah. So yeah, I think their original hypothesis that you might not be able to replicate it because of this difference in time was definitely reasonable, but again, they used tweets from the same time period as the original paper authors in their attempt to reproduce the results, and they couldn't. So, yes, a lot going on with these papers, and it's a fairly long paper. So it's not 342 pages long. This is the page in the volume. It's about 40, I want to say, 45-ish pages, which is, I mean, that's super long for a math paper, but for like a linguistics paper, that's not completely unreasonable, and it's also fairly readable even for someone without a background in economics like me. So I would recommend it. It's a good paper. It's open access, and there's also a bunch of appendices that I need to go back and read and print out. And I have this thing where I can't read technical papers like sitting normally in a chair. I have to, like, I don't know, sit like a cool teenager in an 80s movie or something. Like, I don't know what it is. It's just really hard for me to focus sitting normally in a chair when I'm reading papers. Tremendo says, hi, fellow linguist working on research in English borrowings in French using R as I type. Oh, awesome. That sounds super interesting. I know it's a little bit of a touchy subject with the academy. I remember, I took French in high school, and I remember our teacher being like, you can say le weekend, but just don't tell anybody I told you that. Yeah, anyway. So, paper. We're going to be replicating it. What we're going to use for this is the Twitter repository. So a lot of these we aren't going to be able to replicate. Tremenda says very touchy. That's why I like it. Yeah. So this preprocessing file I don't think we're going to be able to use. Let's take a look. Oh, QuantMod. That's what all the economists used. That and Quandl, I think, are the 2 big economics packages. Oh, it's an imported twice. That's probably not necessary. Stringer, ggplot. Okay, so this is fairly tidy. I haven't actually spent that much time looking at the code. Okay, this I am definitely not going to be able to replicate. Yeah, that's sort of another best practice that I'm quickly becoming pretty passionate about is that you should not use absolute file paths unless you are distributing an entire environment. But again, we can't run this because we don't have access to this data. So this is just sort of a pre-processing file that we won't be able to run ourselves. So reading in the files, read lines, interesting. No, I guess it makes sense for JSON. Okay, and using from JSON. JSON Lite? Are we using JSON Lite? Oh no, RJSON. Okay. So if you remember from the reading JSON files in live stream, if you guys watched that, I used JSON Lite because it has blazingly fast in the description, which is how I choose all my packages. Getting out the different parts of the JSON file. Putting it into a CSV file. Going through all the files and doing that. Okay, so this is just there's a little bit of actual pre-processing. So there's gsub. I imagine this is a version of gsub. Let's see. The gsub fn function is like gsub, but can take a replacement function or certain other objects instead of the replacement string. Matches and back references are input to the replacement function and replaced by the function output. Gsub function, I'm assuming, can be used to split strings based on content rather than delimiters, and for quasi-Perl style string interpolation. Oh, that's interesting. Package also has facilities for translating formulas to functions and allowing such formulas in function calls instead of functions. This can be used with R functions such as apply, sapply, lapply, optum, integrate, xyplot, filter, capital F, and any other function that expects another function as an input argument, or functions like cat or SQL calls that may involve strings where substitution is desired. There's also a facility, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this sounds like something I would never use because I'm pretty committed to the tidyverse, is what I have learned here. But it's interesting to know about. So we're looking through this list for replacement rather than what's the word I'm looking for? We're looking through the list for replacing things rather than giving like a regex, basically. So it's a way to avoid regular expressions, which is probably just as well. They're not very readable. Oop, setting seed for reproducibility, A+, that's a good best practice. I don't know what in here is random, but okay, so we won't be able to run the pre-processing data because pre-processing file because again we don't have the pre-processing data, so we're not going to be able to do any of that. And I didn't notice in here any getting out of the measures that we talked about in here. So this tone measure and this call measure that are extracted based on the bag of words that we looked at earlier, those anxious and calm lists. And these which are Z transforms, so they've been sort of scaled and shifted. And it looks like there's no so the process of getting from the text of the tweet to these measures was not in the pre-processing file, so it must be in this script file, which means that we won't be able to load everything in here, which might be a little bit of a problem. That's okay. We'll see what we can do. And hopefully we'll be able to load in all of these files. I don't necessarily know that we have everything we need here installed in the Docker image, so we may need to end up adding some stuff. So let's start by starting a kernel and then see what problems we run into. I do on a notebook, and I'm gonna call this Twitter stock market replication, and it is in R because they're economists and mathematicians. So of course they're going to be using R. Which, and I'm going to say, I didn't pick papers based on whether they used R or Python. The last one I did used Python, so I'm equal opportunity language user, as long as it's one of those. I'm not gonna be going into Perl. I recently learned that you can run Perl and kernels on Kaggle, which I'm absolutely not reproducing something written in Perl. I'm sorry, guys, it's not happening. There is no package called high frequency. Ugh. All right, let's get rid of that one. Okay, so we just have the one missing. Okay, so we got two options here. So one is that we can go to the Docker image, we can add it to the Docker image, and we can make a pull request. So if we go, I'm way all the way down here on the bottom. So if we go to GitHub and we search for Kaggle, I don't know if you knew this, but a lot of our code is open source. Users? Yeah, there we go. So if we go to Kaggle, we can see the Python Docker image. So Docker is like, let's see if I can explain this good. It's like a virtual machine, right? That like is chugging along. So it's a complete computational environment, and it can have stuff installed in it. And if you want something installed in every Kaggle kernel, you can download the Docker and add it, and then make a pull request with that thing added. And most of the time it'll be added unless there's something like really weird about it. And there's also the R Docker image. And these are open source and under Apache 2.0. So if you want to download this and work locally in a Docker so that if somebody else is using the same Docker image, they can run the same code in the same environment, you can absolutely do that. You're free to do that. So I could ask for it to be added. And I think there's, yeah, okay, so here's the way to request new things if you want them. And you can also leave a message on the product forums, and we keep our eyes peeled. We watch that. And if there's complex dependencies, then here's how you deal with those. But the other thing that we can do is we can go to settings and we can add a custom package. So let's see if the high frequency R package is on GitHub. High frequency R. Is that how you spell frequency? It is not. Oop. And the likelihood that there is going to be a copy of this on GitHub is like medium high. Yeah, here we go. So I should be able to, I'm gonna admit, I have not done this previously. This is the first time I've done this. I should be able to just add it. Preparing to build image. I haven't gotten an error message yet. And I'm gonna copy this, and I'm going to make sure to add it. Going to settings. What's this called? Step 1 of 2. I don't know what that means. Maybe I shouldn't have left this tab. add a package and adding. So I'm assuming it's going to need to. Hey, awesome. Yeah, it worked. So I just need to restart the session. So this is the restart button down here in the corner. And we should be good to go. And this should run no errors. Nice. Yes, absolutely. It worked. Attaching back with high frequency. Yeah, I'm very pleased. I haven't done that before, and it was very straightforward. And I'm going to hide the output because I don't want to see that every single time. Awesome. Step 1. Done. The last project that I was working on, step 1 took a very long time. There were some dependencies that were a pain, and some of them I just couldn't do. So I'm absolutely delighted that it happened. Okay, so here's the bit where we're not going to be able to do this. So this is where they are getting these. I closed it. Anyway, so the measures that we're going to be using of sentiment. And we're not going to be able to do this again. Needed this for Japanese Mac Mini. Oh no. Does this mean there's going to be encoding problems? We'll find out. I hope not. Okay. Making the mood time series. Excellent. So this is the thing we're not going to be able to do. They use the library sentiment R to do this, which I have not previously used. Mostly I use tidytext, again, because I'm very committed to the tidyverse as a programmer. Maybe that'll change one day. Who knows? Okay. Start with sophisticated sentiment analysis. Have some cheese with our sentiment. Snowball, word stem. So here we're just text miner. Again, we're just doing text mining. We're just doing sentiment analysis. If you're interested, I actually wrote a tutorial at some point. Yeah. So if you're interested, I do have a tutorial on how to do all of this if you're, interested in sentiment analyzing. And this is an R as well. But I'm not going to go too deep into that. It's here. I'll post the link if you guys are interested. Okay. Where was I? Oh, that's right. I was staring at their code. Removing stop words, all very good. Ooh, parallel processing. Stemming. Stringy. There's a lot of importing libraries just in the middle here, and I don't like that. That's not fabulous style. I mean, I do it. Let me be clear. I absolutely do it. But if I'm going to be sharing code, usually I'll tidy it up at the end and I'll put it all at the front. So here's where they make the tweet tone. So this is that column. So it's the tone is the composed score minus the anxious score. Okay. Oh, no, sorry. Tone is the composed score minus the anxious score divided by the composed score plus the anxious score. Okay. That makes sense. So it's going to be, so it'll range from 0 to 1, and it will be 1 if the tweet is entirely composed, and it will be 0 if the tweet is entirely anxious. Is that right? No. It'll range from 1 to -1. So it'll be 1 if the tweet is entirely composed, -1 if the tweet is entirely anxious, and 0 is a balanced tweet. Clean tone denominator equals 0 equals 1. Okay, interesting. And they're adding a smoothing term here. So if if there are no composed or no anxious words in the tweet, I suppose, then they make the denominator 1 instead of 0. The output is still going to be 0, and that makes sense because a lot of if you're using a bag of words technique, a lot of short text just won't have the words that you're looking for in them. This is all commented out, so I'm going to ignore it. Data.table. Okay, and getting the daily mood, mean of tone, the mean of calm by dates. Okay. And then it says make our data matrix, but there's no matrix making here. Okay, I think starting here is where I'm going to start needing to copy and pasting. So we've got some visual comparisons, normalizing of the time series. So this was a big chunk of the paper because the original way that the time series was normalized, they looked into the future for each time point. So they were doing like localized smoothing, but for time you can't, if your method looks into the future, it's not going to be very useful for modeling now, right? Because you don't know what the future's going to be. And if you knew what the future was going to be, you'd be able to, not have to do time series modeling, I guess. So that's not a good method for time series. I don't spend a lot of time working with time series, but that is my understanding from the paper, is that they were trying to find a method of normalization that didn't rely on knowing the future, so sort of like backwards normalization. So this is one of the major critiques of the paper, besides just like a lot of multiple comparisons. They actually talked about how Jacob Eisenstein, who's somebody whose research I really enjoy in the sort of the sociolinguistic, computational linguistic realm, actually uses the original study in his classes as an example of multiple comparisons. Okay. Yeah, okay, so I think at this point we're going to... Okay, we already imported these all the way at the top. This gives me the impression of like, I don't know, this feels more like a lab notebook to me than a sort of like complete analysis for sharing. Which, nothing wrong with that. Lab notebooks are great. Everybody should have one if they are doing things that require a lab notebook. But this is going to make it... We're going to have to do a little bit of tidying to make this sort of like a presentable, here's the thing. So... All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to... I do want to get back to my... I don't want to lose my place here. So I'm just going to copy and paste the URL so I can get started. I do want this calm sentiment data because I think that's what I'm going to need first. And I'm just going to save this and upload it as a data set and deal with the data license a little bit later. And it's not that big. And it's about a year and some change worth of data, daily data, so not that big. I saved it, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new data set, and I'm going to call this... Oh, you too! See you later, Tremendo. I'm going to call this... stock market and Twitter summary stats. And I can change this later. I don't know what the thing is yet, and I will fix that a little bit later. Now I've got to go and get the file I just downloaded and upload that. I'm just gonna quickly describe it. I'm zoomed in a little bit too far. File containing daily summaries of Twitter sentiment and stock market Dow Jones Index. Dow, no N. Thanks, Chrome. Information. Save. Oh, it thinks it's a text file. Interesting. So because it's not a CSV file, I don't get all of my my nice. All right, I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm going to look at where the file is in my. You guys can't see my file explorer, so I'm just sort of talking about what I'm doing. I'm gonna change the properties of the file locally. I'm gonna change. Oh my god, it's so slow. So I'm changing the file extension from .txt to .csv. Okay. In theory. Sorry, I rarely do data stuff on Windows, so I'm not entirely sure how to do this. It's very easy on Linux. All right, well, I guess, I'll just deal with it. File with daily summaries. That might be, maybe it's ERIS? Anyway, people know what I mean. Also, this is still private, so nobody's going to see it until I make it public, and I'll gussy it up a little bit before then. And also note what the license is. File with daily summaries of Twitter data and Twitter sentiment. And stock market Dow Jones Index. Activity. Good enough, I guess. And create dataset. So that'll take a moment to upload, and then we can start working with it. Oh, it needs to be added to the local environment as well, which is why your Thingadoodle reloads every time you add a data set. Okay. So in this file, they already have this in the local environment. In my file, I haven't yet loaded in the data, so I'm going to load in the data. I'm going to call it Twitter data. Oh, and I guess to be consistent with the author's style, I will use equals instead of the arrow for assignment, even though I prefer the arrow. And I'm going to do read.csv. And the file is input. All right, no issues. I'm really quickly just going to check the head of this file to make sure it looks good. Yeah, it looks good to me. And we do have a lot of NA values, like I talked about, because these are the weekends. All right. So this is going to be Twitter data $dates, and I should be able to just do this. So I'm going to be creating a data table out of this data frame. And if you're unfamiliar, I think there's a column. Yeah, If you're unfamiliar with data table, it is a package for a specific data structure in R called the data table that is much faster than data frames, but the sort of like main consequence of working with data tables is that things are modified in place rather than being modified as a copy. So you can get yourself into trouble a little bit. But if you're working with very large data, it is much faster. Daily dot mode. Ugh. I also hate dots in our variable names, but that's just my preference. Okay, that worked. All right, what's the next thing? Now we're gonna see if we can plot some of these things, see what they look like. Did we import ggplot? I don't see it. So I'm just gonna actually put things L-I-R-A-R-Y. We may not actually end up needing all of these individual, put these in a different cell so we can see the code and then the, whatchamacallit. So we can see the code and then immediately the other thing. Oh, that's not enjoyable to look at. Okay, something happened. Geom path, each group consists of only one observation. Do you need to adjust the group aesthetic? I don't think so. All right, what about you? Do you work? Also no. Okay, we've run into our first problem. So I believe these figures that we're trying to replicate here are the first figures that are from the authors of this paper and not the original paper, and it is these. Yeah, so this should be tone. So this is the figure that we're going for, and this is the figure that we have, which is to say, not we don't. So okay, yeah, the axes look right, the tick marks look right. We just don't have anything plotted. Okay. So let's take a look at what we're trying to plot. That's my usual thing that I do here. Let me zoom in a little bit more so y'all can see. Send that away. Goodbye. This looks like it should be fine. Dates, yes. Tone, yes. What if we just do the whole thing instead of this range? All right, that also doesn't work. Okay, what if we just do this little bit right here? Okay, also, let's try a different geom and see if that's the problem. Maybe geom point. That's a good one to get started with. It's a nice basic geom. Okay, points work. So the problem is with the geom. Or possibly, this is always what bites me in the butt. Let's look at what daily mood looks like. What's the structure here? This is a factor. it should not be a factor. This should be a date. Okay, I think that's what our problem is. It doesn't know how to draw the lines because it doesn't know that, like, this is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3. So I think we need to parse these dates. I think that's the problem. So I think I can just do stop date. See if that works. It does not work. Okay. R parse date. Capital D date as dot date. All right, all right, all right, all right. And now, do we get a good looking line chart? Excellent. Okay. We did it. I'm very smart. We're a little bit off the bottom of the chart. Is it because we're zoomed so far in? I don't think so. And changing, like, collapsing the margins doesn't seem to change anything. Oh, maybe it's the whole thing that they're plotting on the paper? Yeah, I'm a little bit confused because the points go beyond the margin, and that shouldn't really happen. You know, part of like what ggplot does is it puts all of your points inside your margins. So I'm a little bit confused about why that's happening. But this is exactly their code, and it works and I can see something, so that's nice. Yeah, and that's all I changed. Just to make it a little bit easier to read, like so. All right, well, let's keep going and see what other problems we run into. So I'm having a hard time exactly reproducing the figures from the paper. And it could be that this was just sort of like an experimental figure that they just sort of left in the script, and that we'll get to the exact figures from the paper later on. All right. Oh, maybe the time series that we plotted was normalized. Okay, so this is going to add a couple of columns to our daily mood thing. Basic stats. I don't know this function. This could be a home main function, or this could possibly be imported from something we have failed to import. Our basic stats. Oh, no, that's a thing. It's from fbasics, which we somehow did not import in that huge list of things up at the top. What was it called? fbasics? There is no package called fbasics. Oh, it's because the B is uppercase. So let's try that. Nice. Okay, so we get some information on each of these stats that we're looking at. We get like a lot of information. I don't know what knobs are. Something. Quartiles, mean, medians, skewness, that's nice. Kurtosis, that's nice. Different types of means, standard estimate of the mean, local and local mean. Oh, University College London, yeah, so it's cool. I don't know what that is. It's something. Okay, so we did that bit. Let's go back a little bit further down. Let's take a look at some more plots. Normalized time series doesn't recover BMC's time series, but retains. I think this is a meaning of retains that I don't know. I think this is a economics thing. Okay, we got some errors now. Object Z not found. That's because it's called Z1. All right, so here is the normalized score. So we got that. Again, still doesn't look like the figure from the paper. So this is definitely their code, but this is not doing a good job, at least so far, of giving me exactly the things. Let's do 0, 1 again. So it's not doing a good job of giving me the exact same visuals and output as what we have in the paper itself. So I'm expecting to reproduce this, and I am seeing this. Maybe we'll get to it. Look at, and it's not the same information. So you can see, this one's a little bit easier. So you can sort of see these patterns, these multiple spikes. But and I think it's not just the aspect ratio of the plots being off. I think it's some other stuff going on. And again, we can see we're going outside the limits of the plot, which is very weird to me. And we also see things less than -1 and more than +1, which based on the way that they're normalizing these shouldn't happen. So I'm a little bit confused about that. But I think that's actually where I'm going to leave it for today. I'm going to keep working on this later. I may or may not work on this on my own, and next Friday come back and do something else. Although next week is going to be a pretty busy one for me, so I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to work on this. But yeah, so that is where we've gotten so far. I think we made a pretty good start. We pretty much had no problem with the dependencies. We just had to add a package by going to settings and scrolling down to adding a custom package, and that was no big. Katie Inside says, check your mail for a Dare DS surprise. Oh, I will. Thank you. I've had a busy email day. So I'll dig around in there. Thank you. Yeah, and so far so good. I'm pretty pleased. I feel like this is fairly reproducible. I'm definitely getting out good numbers, and I'm excited to see how this shakes out and how far we can get in really reproducing, the exact figures and outputs from the paper. And I will see you guys next Friday. I had to stop and think about it. All right, I'll see you guys next Friday. Bye-bye.